Welcome, Kumu. And John. We'll give it a minute or two for people to come in before we get started. Hello, Mary. Welcome. Yay, Bhante Jayasara. Yeah, it's me. Hello, Manal. Luisa. Hello, Metika. Welcome. We'll get started in about a minute. Welcome, TJ. All right, let's get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, friends. And Bhante this afternoon asked me to do this session with you today. And he asked if I had a topic in mind, or he would just randomly pick. And I said, I'll randomly pick, because I like to be surprised. And then so it was offered that we talk about Bhava, or Bhava-Tanha. So if you've never heard of Bhava yet, well, it is literally the main problem when it comes to Buddhism. It is the biggest issue when it comes to Buddhism. Some might say, well, what about the first noble truth? Well, yeah, dukkha is a major problem, but the noble truths would not be noble truths without bhava. What do I mean by this? Bhava means existence or becoming. This is the issue. This is the problem. The problem is not necessarily dukkha per se. Because if there was no bhava, if we just had one life, and we didn't have to worry about, future lives, then, well, we'll just survive this life and then be done with it. Or go to heaven, or just not exist anymore. Well, I had to, this life sucked and I had to get, through it, and now I'm okay. Now, no, I don't have to exist anymore. No, that's not the issue. That's not the problem. Is not that. The problem is that we have to keep coming back. This is what the Buddha did when he contemplated. The Buddha contemplated, well, wait a second. You mean I get to be born, grow old, get sick, lose everybody I love, die, and then I have to keep doing that over and over and over and over again? Oh God, that's horrible. And actually, I kind of feel the same way. Like that is, there's few things. I guess maybe an eternal hell would probably be worse. But being born again and again and having to go through these things over and over again, that's pretty rough. This is why the Buddha wanted to find a way out. How do I stop this cycle? How do I stop bhava? How do I stop becoming, existence? So this is the key. This is the goal. In a very famous sutta, the Buddha says, for many a lifetimes I wandered in samsara, seeking but not finding the architect of this house. Sorrowful it is to be born again and again. So bhava is what it's all centered about. When you come to the conclusion that, this is all nice and all, but I really don't want to do this again. This whole bhava thing, it's kind of a lot of suffering. So let's talk about bhava in context. There's a couple different places. So the title here is Bhava-Tanha. So this is the second noble truth. Second noble truth of tanha, craving or thirst. So there's three: kama tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha. So kama tanha is the craving for sensual pleasures. Bhava tanha is craving for existence. Vibhava tanha is craving for non-existence. So we have this craving to continue to exist. This is the origin of dukkha. Until we start to see with wisdom, we think it's actually pretty cool to keep coming back. I did. When I was young, I can remember wanting to live forever. Because I was like, man, I'm too early. I'm not going to be able to be like a spaceship captain and wander the universe and do all these kind of things. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I can live forever. And then I started there are certain like shows and different stories that disabused me of that desire, because then living forever sounded really horrible, because everybody goes away and you keep living. So I was like, no, maybe I don't want to do that. And then I transferred that to, well, maybe I can be born again. I can come back in the future and be the starship captain. But then as I started to practice and understand the Dhamma, develop nibbida, disenchantment, I realized I don't want to do that either. And I probably have in a past life in a galaxy far, far away. Who knows? I've probably done everything in past lives. So now I've reached I probably wouldn't be a monk otherwise, but I've reached the point where it's like, this life is okay, but I don't want to do it again. I don't want to go through high school again. I'm sorry. Definitely not high school. Even the positive parts. So this is bhava. We have this desire. We want to keep coming back. This is literally what drives us. Right? The Buddha says that we reach the end of life with our plans unabated. We want to continue going on. We want to continue experiencing sensual pleasures. And that drive is what propels us to the next life. It's because we want to keep going. We want to keep experiencing. Because there's lots of pleasurable things to experience. The Buddha says that there is a kamogha. Kamogha means a flood of sensual pleasures. You're totally immersed in sensual pleasures. Even in this room, I can see colors that my eye likes, smells, sounds. If you just took 10 seconds to examine your senses and what's around you, you could probably find this kamogha. And we like it. We really want to keep experiencing these things. So this is what we do. We are in the rat race. Normally, when people say the rat race, we think of 9 to 5, right? Until you retire or die. But the real rat race, the meta rat race, the META rat race, is chasing after sensual pleasures and running away from unpleasant experiences. That's what we do. Chasing after what's pleasurable, running away from what is unpleasurable. When you realize that, God, this is really exhausting. Why do I keep doing this? All I'm doing is just leading to the next life, to the next existence. The Buddha lists in there's a bunch of sutras. If you went into some suttacentral.net and you just typed in and search Bhava Sutta, a bunch of them will come up, but mostly they're all pretty much the same content. I'll give you an example. In Samyutta Nikaya 45.164. 45.164. And so what you have in the sutta, the Buddha explains the 3 kinds of bhava. First is, why am I blanking out? There's rupa bhava, arupa bhava. I can't remember the first one. It blanked out. I'll probably remember. These are just forms of places of kama bhava in the sensuous realm. So these are simply not really important to kind of understand these per se, because it's all the places you can exist in the Buddhist cosmology. Really, if we're stuck in kind of like, well, I want to be born in that place, but not that place. Well, what are you doing? I want to be born in the heavenly realms, not the hell realms. What are you doing? Chasing after the pleasurable, running away from the unpleasurable. So if you want to have any kind of existence at all, there is dukkha. There is suffering. So the Buddha picks up a little piece of dung in his fingernail and he says, I do not approve of even this amount of samsara. Basically, the Buddha is saying, get the heck out of this thing as fast as you can. Follow the path. Practice the Dhamma. Get out. And so we can see with the dependent origination where bhava lies. So after ignorance and sankharas and vijnanas and namarupas, after all those things, and after namarupa, salayatana, the 6 sense bases, once we have this body, we have senses that we interact with the world. And we like pleasurable things. We don't like unpleasurable. We don't like painful things. So we want to have contact with pleasurable things. As soon as we have contact with pleasurable things, as soon as we have contact, we have feeling. pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And as soon as we have feeling, we have upadana, clinging, craving, clinging, grasping fuel. And then once you're done, once you have that, well, you're locked in, because the next thing is bhava. After you have that thirst to keep going, and then you cling to feed that thirst. That's what upadana is. That's fuel. You're fueling that thirst. You're fueling that craving to keep going, to keep experiencing. The awakened ones have stopped fueling. This is a simile of the lamp. In the chanting at Bhavana, one of the chantings, the English goes, the wise go out just like this lamp. Where do they go out? They've stopped fueling. There's no more upadana. So there's no more bhava. Right, this is the wonderful message of the Buddha, actually. Right? The people always, people who don't know Buddhism will say, "Oh, Buddhism is always depressing and talking about suffering and that we want to leave the existence and all these things. So nihilist." No, actually, Buddhism is very realist. The Buddha was a realist. He wants us to see things as they are, to see the real truth of the nature of existence. And then he's the optimist who gives us hope and says, this is the way you do it. So in that sutta that I mentioned, where he lists the 3 forms of bhava, the Buddha says, for one to overcome bhava, one should practice the Noble Eightfold Path. Right? Because the Noble Eightfold Path is the way that leads to the ending of dukkha. Leads to the ending of fuel. Or once we have bhava, once we have existence, what do we have? Jati, birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And thus arises the whole mass of suffering, as the Buddha says. Right? Once we have that existence again, we're locked in. We can't escape that old age, sickness, and death. And then coming back again in another form. This is the importance of bhava, to understand this, to really understand. This is the crux of everything. The wise are tired of this cycle. They see through it. They see at its core that there's really no pleasure to be had. Whatever pleasure there is short-term and eventually leads to suffering because we crave to it, we cling to it, and we chase, we give chase to acquire. This Bhava-Tanha, desire for existence. And so if we look at dependent origination, as we did, now we look at dependent cessation. With the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of sankharas, Down, 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 with the cessation of the six senses. No namarupa, no body, no senses, no contact, no feeling, no thirst, no clinging, no bhava, no becoming, no existence. And then also no birth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Thus is the unraveling of this whole mass of suffering. And, of course, the whole rebirth thing can seem quite romantic, can it? It's like, oh, I'm going to be this. I've been this such and such a person. And even if you have like a spouse or a significant other, it's like, I will love you throughout all the ages. We will be born again. And, all these kind of, instead of soulmates, it's rebirth mates. Not just one lifetime, but many lifetimes. You see that in the suttas. You see it with Mahakassapa and Bhatta right, who were married through many, many lifetimes, and they were monastics and practiced through many lifetimes until they became awakened in their final lifetimes. Right, so these things do exist, but these things come out of ignorance, right? Ignorance of the true nature of things. Hmm. And some people might say, well, Bhante, there's both good and bad things in life. You have to take them both together. Well, that's true. I probably, I remember earlier in life thinking that, and I probably thought that a couple lifetimes ago. This is a hard thing though for a lot of people, especially if you're kind of new to Buddhism, you're a Westerner, you're kind of not really feeling the whole rebirth thing. Well, there's good news. Because the Buddha explains that, in the case of Puttiya Sutta, more famously known by the wrong name of Kalama Sutta, the Buddha explains that even if you do not believe, even if there is no rebirth, then still doing this path in this very life can bring happiness. This is why it's good that for people who are coming into it, that they don't feel pressured to believe in these things. But it's also important that they should be taught. This is one thing, like talking about something like bhava is something that many, many teachers might not bring up when talking to non-Buddhists or Buddhist converts. But it's such at the core of the Buddhist teachings. So it's really important to understand the context. There are places in the suttas and also in the monastic Vinaya where somebody does something pretty bad. And the Buddha said, it would have been probably better that you died horribly in this life than to have done what you did, because it's going to be worse off for you in future lives. The Buddha is looking out for our welfare, not just in this life, but in future lives as well, until we become one of those who have stopped fueling. Not everybody's expected to stop fueling. Heck, I think in modern days, even many monks have stopped the desire to stop fueling. This is what we do. We keep feeding our thirst. I find it funny that there's in modern parlance now among younger people than me, there's the thing they call them like what like a good looking person could be like a thirst trap or something like that, right? They use this term thirst. You're thirsty. Right. And I have some people say, oh, yes, it could mean some stuff that would be embarrassing. It could mean other things. But this is perfect, though. This is utterly perfect because this is what Tanha is. I don't care for craving. Thirst makes better sense. And that's literally the Tanha literally means thirst. There's a reason why the Buddha picked that word. We are thirsty. We want to keep experiencing. We want to keep lapping it up, drinking it in. Forever. Keep going. I want more. This is the nature of society. This is the nature of existence. You can look out into society, and this is what you can see. Thirst. People born into this world, not knowing what they're doing. Most people don't know what they're doing. Maybe there's some arhants in this world that know what they're doing, but other than that, basically nobody knows what they're doing. And we're just following our thirst. That's all we're doing. Like ping pongs. Like I have this image of beings like ping pongs just randomly flying through the air, and once in a while we just bounce off each other, causing each other harm, right? Creating harm and suffering. Nobody knows what we're doing because we're ignorant. We're full of greed, hatred, and delusion. We're deluded beings. And because we're deluded, well, we keep thirsting. We keep coming back over and over and over again. Sorrowful it is to be born again and again. And then the triumphant lines, the Buddha says, "Architect, thou art seen, shall build no house again. I have achieved the end of craving." If you've been practicing a while, you might think, oh yeah, oh, that sounds so good. How do I get there? Well, the Noble Eightfold Path, obviously. And so this is not an easy thing. Not an easy thing. But if we slowly practice letting go, slowly practice choosing not to follow our thirst. Of course, that can only be done in limited ways. We're not awakened beings. So even those of us who have been meditating for decades, we've come far, but there's still far to go. We can practice letting go. And actually, when we practice letting go, whether that's through dana, generosity, living by virtuous principles, bhavana, cultivating a bright mind. And slowly we start to understand how we are causing ourselves suffering and how we can stop causing ourselves suffering. And then as you become more wise, nothing in existence, or less and less things in existence, trigger your thirst, your craving. Less and less things. Still some things do, but less things do. And so you act more skillfully. You practice the Dhamma. And the number of lives starts to dwindle in front of you. And then one day, just like the Buddha and all the men and women who have come after the Buddha, who followed the path to its end, you too stop fueling. Stop grasping. The lamp that you've kept lit for untold numbers of lifetimes starts to go dim. And eventually it goes out. Just like the saying goes, the wise go out just like this lamp. The simile that the Buddha gives of the lamp, right? There's the lamp, there's the wick, and there's the oil. Maybe some of you have gone to a forest monastery like Bhava-Tanha Society, and you stayed in a kuti, and you have an oil lamp. And I was lucky enough to live in a kuti for a couple years, where I had an oil lamp, and that was the only light I had. So I got used to changing the wick and filling the oil. And so the simile of the lamp really kind of came alive to me. And you could see that when the oil started getting low and the wick couldn't get the oil all the way up, the flame was just really minuscule. And so the simile of the lamp that the Buddha gives is nothing. It's not that the lamp breaks. It's not that the wick runs out, which wicks do run out, but actually it takes months. Wicks can last a long time. The fuel goes out much quicker. So this is what parinibbana means. Parinibbana, final extinguishment. What is extinguished? Birth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. No more bhava, no more birth. No more birth, no more death. And this gives me a chance to say my favorite Buddhist joke. One of the only actual Buddhist jokes. Make me one with everything is not a Buddhist joke, even if the Dalai Lama isn't, because the Buddha never said anything about everybody being one. This is my favorite Buddhist joke. And it's also one of the jokes that really you have to be a Buddhist to even get it. So the joke is about a Buddhist coroner. You know what a coroner is? Somebody who performs autopsies and finds a cause of death for people. This is a doctor who autopsies bodies. And he autopsies the bodies and he gets fired. Why does he keep getting fired? Why did he get fired? Well, because he kept listing cause of death as birth. Did you imagine that? Right? Ashel knows the joke. Ashel said it right there. Right? Ultimately, the cause of death is birth. Whether you die at 80 and in your bed, 20 in a car accident, 10 of cancer, whatever, however you die, the ultimate cause of death is birth. And the ultimate cause of birth is becoming, bhava, existence. So yeah, this is the ultimate goal. No more birth, no more death. This is why Nibbana is called the deathless. All of those who follow the Noble Eightfold Path will eventually extinguish and stop grasping. Now, for some, it might be in 1,000,000 lifetimes from now, 1,000 lifetimes from now. This lifetime, maybe. If you practice well enough and the karmic conditions, causes and conditions are there, maybe. But this is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to do what the Buddha told us to do. Get the heck out of this samsaric state. No more. End this journey of suffering. And so this is what we all encourage you to do. This is what the Buddha encouraged us to do. This is what monastics should be doing. This is what even monastics, I still think if you look at the suttas, the Buddha even encouraged lay people to do this as well. Modern times is kind of like maybe lay people are in Buddhist countries aren't really taught, this much per se. But this is the ultimate goal. No more bhava. Reject bhava. Say no to bhava. Abandon your thirst, your craving. Can you do it? Yeah, you can do it. Follow the Noble Eightfold Path. That's how you do it. Everything else is details. As long as you're following the Noble Eightfold Path, you're getting there. This life or the next, or 100 lifetimes from now. So I think that's good. Why don't we spend some time for questions? I already think, did I see a question? Maybe. Yeah, I already saw a question. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. Sure.
Handamayam dhammagathaya sadhukaram dadamase sadhu sadhu sadhu.
Appreciation for the best Buddhist joke there is. Yes, it's funny. People laughing. All right. So type your questions in the chat. We also have a full studio audience here, so we can get questions from them as well. But let me... Anthony says, Neo seeing the architect, Buddha breaking out of Mara's matrix. Yeah. We can break out of the matrix called samsara. Let's see, just do some welcomes. Welcome Shihan, Rim, Samsam, Amaranta, Julie, Edward, Kobe, and Kim. Kumu has a question. Bhante, since we don't remember our past lives other than enlightened beings, and there is no real permanent soul or solid I to get attached to, isn't Bhava and Vibhava-Tanha any way of no use? Well, I mean, yeah, it's no use when you have the wisdom to realize that. Otherwise, then that's the cycle that you're stuck in. Vibhava-Tanha is an interesting one. This is something I could have explained a little bit more in the talk. But now that it's come up, I can talk about Vibhava is interesting, right? Craving for non-existence. And different people, this is an interesting thing, not seen too often in the suttas. People have different kind of perspectives on what this actually means. And the way I understand it is that there's levels of craving for vibhava, right? There's the kind of aversive, suicidal, like, I don't want to exist again, right? So you try to kill yourself to stop the existence, which is an utter horror show in samsara, because you kill yourself to escape one existence and you just go to another one. That's that's like the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? But there's also the kind of wholesome desire, wholesome thirst to be done, to not be born again. Right? Eventually we have to let that go because it's craving. But in the sutta with Ananda, Majjhima Nikaya, I forgot the number, where Ananda is asked, is there such a thing as good tanha? Good craving, good thirst. And Ananda says, yes. The thirst that leads to the ending of all thirst. The craving that leads to the ending of all craving. So yes, there is actually good tanha, as long as it's leading you to the ending of tanha. Right? So, vibhava might actually be used in a skillful way. Bhava could also be used in a skillful way through an aspiration. Right? It's like, may I be born in a place that I can hear the Dhamma. May I be born next life where I can become a monastic, right? Where I can practice the Dhamma, right? Where I have I'm not in a place where I have to worry about my survival every day and there's wars going on and all these kind of things, right? That will keep me from being able to practice well. Well, that's one example. That's one of the only examples I could think of where, bhava could be used in a skillful way, because it's aspiration of bhava for the ending of bhava. Starship Texas, clarify that statement for me. it's kind of a question slash statement, but I don't know that I can respond to it. I sometimes feel like entertainment is craving for non-existence if you look at it in a certain way. So if you can clarify that for me, I might be able to say something about it. Yo, a hood monk. Love you. I don't know what a hood monk is. But metta to you, Edward. I love random internet comments. They can be quite entertaining. All right. So Manal has a question. Would you have any sutta reference or story in which the Buddha offered encouragement to practitioners how to snuff out some of the last bit of stubborn lingering wick light? That's an interesting way of putting it. I can't think of any one in particular. That's a pretty broad request. I'll farm it out. Is there any specific sutta that you guys might think of that might be specifically about this? Snuffing out the last. So I guess the last bit of craving, the last bit of ignorance, snuffing out that last bit. I don't know. I can't think of specific. Yeah.
It's before it's kind of, I think it's important to just focus, on the Buddha's basic teachings, the Noble Eightfold Path. If you follow that, as you said, like, we don't need to worry about those last parts of existence. We need to worry about that craving that's right in front of us. And what's that? Like that, I think for all of us, as you said before, we're all ignorant. Like we're all unaligned beings. And so I think it's important to focus on those beginning stages before we worry about like those last bits of existence. Like we have so much already right in front of us. And so I think when I first heard the question, I was just like all of Buddhist teachings were leading to that point. And when we follow all of the teachings, like when we get to that point, like you don't really have to worry about it. Once you're there, like it happens. You've already advanced enough. That's just my point.
Thank you, Bhante. So Anthony has a comment / question. Bhava-Tanha and Vibhava-Tanha would be underlying tendencies, fetters, no? Even if we don't, technically no, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, yes. It is, Bhava-Tanha and Vibhava-Tanha come from craving. That's why they're under Tanha. Even if we don't believe in rebirth at the moment of death, we would still be influenced strongly to become something. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Alex, Bhante, of the opinion that other than people living in monasteries, no one is able to strictly follow the 5 precepts. I'm not under that opinion at all. That's the 5 precepts are like the basic level of virtue. The Buddha is like, okay, come on, people, be virtuous. Here's like the very, very basic core. And he says, these are gifts to the world. No wise person would ever say anything bad about them. Start with these 5. You can keep going from there. There's a lot more, but start with these 5, right? The 5 precepts are like the very basis, the very beginning of Buddhist virtue, ethics, morality. And, I would say I did how many? I still have like twice the amount of years as a lay Buddhist than as a monastic Buddhist. And I did the 5 precepts pretty good. Even tried out doing the 8 in lay life for a bit, but that didn't work out too well. It's not really the best for lay people. The 5 precepts anybody can do. Now, what you might think you say here strictly, or maybe you're thinking perfectly, right? The point of the precepts are training, right? So that you're going to break if you're thinking of precepts as, I have to not break these ever, then you're just causing yourself suffering. The precepts are something that you are intentionally deciding that you want to live by. And so you train in them. So the first precept, Panatipata Vedamani Sikapadang Samadhiyami. Sikapadang Samadhiyami is the most important part of the precept. A training rule to be undertaken. The Buddha, these are not like what we have this kind of misunderstanding or this kind of perception of what a Christian commandment is. Like, you better follow the commandment or else you go to hell. That's not even quite like how it really was from the beginning either. I mean, but that's kind of our perception of what a commandment is. And the Buddhist precepts are not that. They're you deciding that you want to try to live better in the world, act more skillfully. And so many lay people can follow these 5 precepts to the best of their ability. Of course, they'll break the precepts. That's normal. It's absolutely normal that you'll break precepts. But you want to sincerely be trying to be better and to not break them. Right? That's the most important thing. If you're not lying to yourself, if you're sincere, if you're honest with yourself, and you're really trying, then if you break a precept, it's okay. Same thing with monastics. And if you break a precept, it's okay. The Buddha tells us this. Right? There's 3 steps to when you do commit a transgression. Right? In the suttas, in many places, somebody comes up to the Buddha and they say, Bhante, I've committed a transgression. And the Buddha says, indeed, foolish man, you have committed a transgression. But you have acknowledged that you've made a transgression. You've made amends for it in accordance with the Dhamma. And now seek future restraint. Right? So it's built in that you're going to fail. It's built in that you're trying to do better. You're training yourself. So think about it in that way. And then you won't be too worried about if you break a rule. Oh, Kevin, Bhante, back to Empty Cloud? Yes, only for a couple of days, though. But I'll be back for all of May and half of June. So you'll be seeing me a lot more then on the streams. Hello, Michelle. Welcome. Dreamy Pisces says, why isn't it enough to express our free will not to come back to the earth? Like, nope, I'm not coming back, period. That's because you don't technically have full free will. That's because you haven't abandoned the craving, right? Willpower is limited. even if you're like the big, some tough, like Navy SEAL dude or whatever, people who we think is like have really strong willpower is limited. Eventually it runs out. What you want to develop is wisdom power. Right? When you have wisdom power, then naturally you just let go and then you won't come back. Until then, you can't be like, okay, may I not come back in the next life? May I not come back in the next life? May I not come back in the next life? Well, as long as you have tanha, guess what? You're coming back in the next life. Sorry. So no, you can't willpower your way or intention your way out of not coming back. You can intention your way into practicing, into letting go. Yeah. But no, there's many places where the Buddha will say, and this is not to be had by wishing. This is one of those things that's not to be had by wishing. And so Starship is giving a clarification to his previous comment about entertainment. With entertainment, I want my awareness of conceptual reality of myself, of everything in the world, to just go away. The watching entertainment is not for the pleasure, but to ignore dukkha. Yeah, that can be one of the reasons why you would have entertainment. Yes. Yeah. So in the Salla Sutta, the simile of the arrow, the Buddha explains that it's our underlying tendency that when we experience unpleasant experience, and we don't know another way to escape it. So what do? We drown it out with pleasant experience. So when we have an unpleasant day at work, we want to eat good food, sit by the TV and veg out, right? Or we want to go do drugs or go have sex or go whatever. We just want to have some pleasant experience to counteract all the aversion and the negative experience that we had. This is our underlying tendency. This is what we do, for sure. And you are right in that I don't know that somebody wants their awareness of conceptual reality to go away. That's just the nature of what happens. And I know, I'll give you an example. I remember it's maybe about a year before I went to the monastery. So I've been a meditator for many years by that point, practitioner by many years, had already started getting, good insights and stuff for years. So this was, I was not new when this happened, but I remember I was in a movie and all of a sudden, as I say, the fourth wall broke. I just came just crashing into my body. I've been practicing Satipatthana and mindfulness for many years by this point. And I was crashing into my body. And this is one of the few times, and as somebody who loved movies, I love going to the movie theaters. I realized, oh, wait. No, I was just sucked into this thing, the screen. I wasn't here. I wasn't there. I was in it. And now I'm not. Now I'm mindful. Now I'm here. It's oh, yeah, this is what we do. This is what happens when we are unmindful. This is why when years later, I had another realization. I had this period of time, maybe an hour or two, where I was completely unmindful, completely wrapped into something. I realized, oh, wait a second. During this time, there was no death. There was no aging. I wasn't getting older. I wasn't going to die. And I realized that's how most people live their whole life. That's why when all of a sudden you grow old, you fall apart. Everything falls apart. I grew up around lots and lots of older people growing up. And that was such a wonderful experience for me, because I got to see how growing old, many people just fell apart and other people grew old gracefully. But this is what we do. We don't pay attention to reality at all our whole lives. We try to avoid it. We don't want to think about death. We don't want to think about aging. We don't want to think about any of these things. And so we kind of live in our mind in this kind of in-between state. Like, we're not going to die. I've done close to 15 years of mindfulness of death practices. And there's still times where I can see that my mind doesn't believe it's going to die or get old. When I think about like how eventually starting my own place, having, people come and ordain under me and all these things, in that image, I'm me now. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, it's like, dude, you're going to be like old. You're going to be like gray hair and you're going to be like this. And like, no, by the time all that happens, you're going to be old, man. Like, my mind still can't wrap even though I've done all these practices for so many years, my mind's still not there yet. Years ago at Bhava-Tanha, I was doing my mindfulness of death practices in front of the skeleton that hangs in front of the meditation hall. And I was going over the 5 subjects of contemplation. I am subject to old age. I'm not beyond old age. And I lost mindfulness right about the time I started repeating, I am subject to death. And then my mind said, I am exempt from death. And I caught that immediately and I just laughed. Like, you ignorant idiot. You are not exempt from death. No, but that's how we live. That's why the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, heedfulness is close to the deathless. Heedlessness is close to death. Those who are heedful never die. Those who are heedless are as if dead already, i.e. zombies, sheeple, NPCs, whatever you want to call them, right? Most of us live lives completely oblivious to reality. We're zombies. So we don't want to be zombies. We want to be mindful. Samson says, can you mention the next 3 precepts to the 8? So in the 8 precepts, Kama, the 3rd precept goes from sexual misconduct to abrahmacharya, so to no sexual activity. And these are the 8 monastic precepts we're talking about. And then you have the no sleeping in high or large beds, no wearing garlands, perfumes, etc., and eating at the right time. So those are the 3. Ethan has it, and I think this is Ethan, who I've known for many, many years, who I used to know from Bhava-Tanha, maybe, or it could be a different Ethan. But Ethan that I know usually comes up with these good suttas like this. So he says, Bhante, there's the Kamaka Sutta, where the Venerable Kamaka explains how a non-returner keeps focusing on the arising and passing of the aggregates, leading eventually to full enlightenment. It's not the Buddha teaching, but it fits the bill for Manal's question. Yeah. Alex has a question. Why are breaking the precepts so profitable? Well, that's because we're ignorant. We think that they're profitable. This is what we think, that, there's this horrible, government or this horrible leader. Well, we just have a resistance and kill everybody and take over, and then everything will be better. Right? That's the nature of how we think in reality. But no, what happens is the people who led the resistance become the next tyrant. Right? This is the cycle of things. So we think we have diluted views of well, if I just did this, this, and this, and this, then everything would be better. Maybe. For the short term. But in the long run, no. No. So this is a deluded, ignorant view of thinking that acting in an unskillful way will be profitable in the short term. In the Dhammapada, it says, so long as the fruit of a person's bad karma does not come to fruition, then they do not lament about it. But once it does, then they lament about it. So no, I would not say that they are profitable, at least not in the long term. Mary says, growing old is not for sissies. Having had a recent health scare, I try to be more aware of reality. Yes, good, Mary. Good, Mary. TJ has an interesting question. And it connects actually to what I was saying before. What is the difference between Bhava-Tanha and Bhava-Sava? Bhava-Asava. So asava, this is these asavas are the kind of like the flows, right? The taints of existence. So this continued existence flowing from life to life. So that's what that would be, right? This continued flow. Ethan says, indeed it is. Good to see Ethan. I've known Ethan now, I think 9 years, something like that. Alex has a good follow-up question. Is it possible to have a deep meditation experience if breaking the precepts? Depends on what you mean by deep meditation experience. If you mean like going into the jhanas, doubtful, highly doubtful, right? Because you have to be secluded from anything that would cause you to break precepts. Now, you could have an insight arise from breaking a precept. Right? People think that you only get insights by going to retreats, but no, you can go to a 10-day retreat and not get any insight whatsoever. And then a month later, you break a precept and insight arises. You're like, oh, I get it now. Right? So there's a difference. So yeah, you can definitely have a insightful experience for breaking the precepts, but deep meditation experience, probably not. Unless breaking that precept propels you with insight into a deep meditation experience. Somebody knows me well. Bhante, next time you should print up some Buddhist memes to show. Actually, well, since it's on the topic, one of my favorite Buddhist memes is this baby crying, and the caption says, "Oh no, not again." Yep. Oh no, not again. Well, but this is also what Ajahn Chah says. Ajahn Chah says that we do things the opposite. We cry when somebody dies, and we're happy when somebody's born. He says, "What the baby's crying, the baby knows it's come back again." Right? All right. So we do have some time, and we've reached the end of questions in the chat. Is there any questions in the audience? Don't feel like you have to have a question. If you don't, it's perfectly fine. So I'll give it another minute or two for any questions to arise in the chat. Oh, Here comes. Oh, Alex again. Alex is being a good questioner, a good investigator today. It's very good. I like your line of questioning, Alex. Bhante, let's say you had the choice to lie, which would possibly save a life. Would it be skillful to lie in this circumstance? It's never skillful to lie. Buddha's quite clear with this. It's never skillful to lie. It is a negative karmic action to lie. Some people will just choose to outweigh that, and they will say, well, if the lie does XYZ, then I'll do it. Same thing with killing, right? Buddha says there's no reason that you could ever give that is skillful to kill. But then some people are like, well, my pet that I've loved for 15 years is suffering. Why don't we just put it out of its misery so that we don't suffer? Right? Even a Buddhist I've known multiple Buddhist people say, I know it would be killing, but you know what? To end their suffering, I'm going to take on that karma. I would not advise for it to do that, but some people do that. This is the nature of the bhava. This is the nature of samsaric existence. You are damned if you do and damned if you don't. Nobody gets out of this life clean. Right? So there's only an awakened being gets out of this life clean. Everybody else has to make choices. And I can understand where you're coming from, where this is, for those of you who don't know, this is the person who asked about it being impossible for a layperson to perfectly follow the precepts, right? So this is this is a logical line of reasoning and questioning that Alex is giving here. So this is where you can only make the best decision that you can make. You will be brought up with hard choices. Right? I was a child protective service worker, so I know well this experience, right? So you might have to choose between, killing things like bed bugs and lice or letting your children be unhealthy and harmed. I can pretty much guess what choice a parent's going to make. Right? But you have the karma of having brought beings into the world that you're responsible for. And sometimes that means you might choose to be unskillful. It's still unskillful. This is the important thing, right? Just as I was saying about how you shouldn't sugarcoat it. I'm never going to sugarcoat and say it's skillful. Well, maybe if you do it this way, it would be skillful. It's always unskillful. But you also have the option, as somebody who has mostly free will, to choose to do something unskillful. Like the Buddha says that there is white karma, black karma, and both white and black karma. What does that mean? So there's karma that's wholly good, karma that's wholly evil, and karma that's a mix. Most people pretty much are almost always doing some mix of good and bad karma. And sometimes there's things that we do that are fully bad or fully good. This question also is very commonly asked. What is the thing that everybody brings up? Well, what if it's like World War II and you're hiding Jews under the floorboard and the Nazis come in looking for them? Right? I've heard this question asked probably 100+ times. And a good chunk of those have been to me, but also to other monastics like my preceptor Bhante Gunaratana. And so what I would say is this. If you're wise enough, you can figure out ways to not lie. If you're not wise enough, you probably choose to lie. Still unskillful. Buddha is very clear. The Buddha says there is one thing that if done, it would be expected that a person could do any other thing. That is to tell a deliberate lie. Buddha is clear cut on this. Very clear cut. But we also understand that, yeah, people are not perfect. And we will choose to do some things over others. That's the nature of how this samsara. The only perfect way of living in samsara is getting out of samsara, is not living in samsara. Other than that, in all of your past lives, you have innumerable numbers of good and bad karma that you've done. And in this life, it's the same thing. This is the nature of being in the samsaric existence. The tragic hellhole, I like to call it. The travesty of being in the samsaric existence. You cannot be perfect until you are awakened. Until then, you're training. I like to actually, when this question comes up, I like to bring up the from the Vinaya. There's a humorous thing where one of the first disciples of the Buddha, a young man named Yasa. Yasa was like the most popular guy in the village. And long story short, after he became awakened, most of the young guys in the village also became awakened, and all the families in the village complained that the Buddha was the stealer of sons, the son stealer. So Yasa came to the Buddha. He was a lay person. He was not awakened, but he came to the Buddha and he had a conversation with the Buddha, and he becomes awakened. Then he becomes a monastic. And then Yasa's father comes looking for him, comes up to the Buddha. The Buddha uses psychic powers to make Yasa invisible. And the father's like, "Have you seen Yasa?" The Buddha's like, "No, I don't see Yasa." And someone might say, "Well, the Buddha's lying." Well, there's multiple layers to that question, to that answer. There's the layer of anatta. You have an awakened being. There is no Yasa, right? There's also the layer of, well, Yasa is invisible. So there's multiple layers. This is an awakened being who's wise and knows what they're doing, and they can do something like that. Most of us, if we tried something like that, it wouldn't work out as well. So we just do the best that we can. That's all. Julie has a comment question. Living a worldly lay life, I find that the more that meditate, the less I have desires. Yes. But to pursue my career and bringing up my children, I need to continue becoming. Not necessarily. You could raise your children and then become a monastic and try to become awakened when you're older. But you continue becoming in this lifetime, I guess, yeah. But it feels different. Less out of developing myself and advancing in life. Any suggestion on how to determine how much to put effort in and how much to stay more stagnant, if that makes any sense? Keep following the Noble Eightfold Path. Put as much effort into it as you can. We all have responsibilities, right? You have children. That's a responsibility. You have responsibility to them in this lifetime. Even if you wanted to right now, it's like, I can't stand these kids. Right? When maybe they become teenagers, like, I want to get away from these kids, give them up for adoption. I'm going to become a monastic. And you go to the monastery and you try to ordain, and they're like, "Are there any responsibilities?" And you're like, "No, you can't ordain. Sorry, go take care of your kids." Right? So this is quite, you have responsibilities. And so the Buddha says that there are two kinds of fools. One is a person who does not takes on a responsibility that is not theirs. And the other is a person who does not take on a responsibility that is theirs. Well, guess what? Your children, your family, they're your responsibility. They're part of your practice. Right? In this life, they are part of your practice. So, right, as you're raising them, dealing with learning how to learning how to bring a being into the world and training them in such a way that they can survive well in the world and be a positive addition to it. Not an easy feat, huge learning curve there. That's part of your practice. Right? Training, giving the children the ability to hear the Dhamma. That's a very wonderful thing. Even if they don't become Buddhists, right? There's still a lot of good things that can be learned. I was raised Catholic school my whole life, altar boy, the whole deal. I still learned a lot of good things, a lot of good qualities from that. Right? So there's lots of good things that you can learn. And don't worry about how far you might go. Just practice. Take care of your responsibilities in this life. I had the only time I ever was able to spend time with Bhante Analayo. It was a very famous German monastic, and I asked him about, because he had, when I had met him, he had just come from taking care of his parents for a couple of years. He lived with his parents and took care of them. And I asked him about kind of like responsibilities in this way and things. And he said that a wise practitioner takes care of the responsibilities they have and does not create new ones. I thought, ooh, that's I'm going to remember that. That's really wise. Right? So you have responsibilities. You're a practitioner. Try not to create too many new responsibilities. Take care of the ones you have now and practice. TJ says, Buddha said, whom shall I call my teacher? It eventually ends up with Upaka saying, may it be so, and departing. What do you think? Is that the same sutta? I don't know. I think what you're pointing towards is where the Buddha reflects and thinks that, it is good to have something or somebody above you that you pay respects to. And the Buddha looked at the world and he saw that there is no one higher than the Tathagata. And there never is anyone higher than the Tathagata. And so he says, I will pay respects to this Dhamma. Dhamma is the highest. Dhamma is the most important of the triple gem. Because without the Dhamma, there is no Buddha and there's no Sangha. So Dhamma is the highest thing that one should have in their life. One should raise high the banner of seers. Raise high the Dhamma, for the Dhamma is the banner of seers. You're welcome, Julie. Yeah. Thank Bhante Analayo for that wonderful statement. Another thing that Bhante Analayo told me that I think about very often, because this is shortly after Bhante Gunaratana made me a Samanera and then started having me teach at Bhavana retreats. And I was like really freaked out about that. I didn't think that I should be doing that, I remember I asked Bhante Analayo about it, and he said, we all have our own karmic trajectory. And I think about that often. And I realize, yeah, he's right, because we do. And I've accepted my karmic trajectory. Took a while, but yeah. All right. Anything from this people here? Nothing? Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for tonight. So going back to the meaning of a crying baby, the baby's crying because he or she, whatever knows, and then also going back to how, you just said that, how do not take on new responsibilities, and how your children are your responsibilities. So what are some, for people who don't have kids, what are some of the conscious reasons they might choose to bring new souls into the world?
Well, I mean, the number. Okay, so the question is about, like, for people who don't have kids, what are the conscious reasons why they might choose to bring new souls to the world? Well, I mean, the number one reason always is that's a drive that we have as humans, right? That's what the species have, the drive to procreate, to have a next generation. This is a drive that even if people don't have actual children, they still think in that way. Like, even me, I don't have any actual children in this world, but I think about what I can do. Like, who am I going to leave for the future that can help the world in the future? Like, disciples and, sons and daughters, as Buddha's, monks will call, people they ordain. So there's still, we just have ingrained in us this kind of this thing. So for most people, that's just the number one reason, right? That's the reason. And of course, in modern times, there's this very kind of what they call antinatalist feeling of, like, who would bring a human being into this world with such and such is happening and all these things. And Buddha, I would not say is pronatal or antinatal. He doesn't really say one or the other, because that's not really his concern. But if you do have children, obviously the Buddha encourages to train them in such a way that they are moral, good people, right? That they can understand how to be in the world in a skillful way. So, that's if you're kind of a more optimistic person about the world, maybe I can train some children that will be good in the world. But on the other hand, that can also possibly be arrogance towards your ability that you think you can actually do that, which is not easy. Parent is a tough job. I never underestimate how tough it is being a parent. So yeah, it really, it doesn't matter what the reason why somebody might want to have a kid. That will be up to the individual. What matters is how you train and teach the kids. That's what's the most important thing. Right? The Buddha says there's duties that parents have to children and children have to parents. Right? And one of the duties that parents have to children is to train them well, to set them in morality and virtue, and to take care of them, obviously. And then children have their duties to parents is to take care of them as they get older, and also to put them into if your parents are immoral people, well, one of your duties is to kind of see if you can help them become more moral, right? So the Buddha talks about parent and child in this way, but he doesn't really give specifics on what reasons there would be that somebody would want to have a child. All right. Well, it is 9 o'clock here on the East Coast of America. So that means it's time for bed, especially in the monastery when we have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So friends, thank you all for coming and attending today and asking very good questions. Sukhi Hotu, which means may you be happy and at ease, practice well and be well. May you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice until we meet again.